John stepped through the front door of his house, exhausted from another long day at work. The weight of the day pressed down on his shoulders, and all he wanted was to see his wife, Emma. The comforting sight of her smile, the warmth of her presence, these were the things that made every difficult day worth it. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of a kettle whistling in the kitchen. He followed the sound, loosening his tie as he walked down the hallway. The soft glow of the kitchen light spilled into the darkened living room, and the moment he stepped inside, he saw her. Emma stood by the stove, carefully pouring hot water into 2 cups. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "Hey," she said, her voice warm but tired. "You're late," John exhaled, stepping closer. "Yeah, things got busy, but I'm home now." He reached for her, wanting to pull her into his arms, but just as his fingers brushed her shoulder, something caught his eye. Something that made him stop cold. A bruise. Dark, ugly, and shaped like fingers, it spread across the side of her neck. John's breath hitched. His stomach twisted as he stared at it. That wasn't an accident. That was a grip, someone's grip. His mind raced, his pulse quickening. Had she been attacked? Had someone hurt her? "Emma." His voice came out low, uncertain. "What is that on your neck?" Emma blinked, confused for a moment. Then she touched the bruise as if realizing for the first time that it was there. Her expression changed instantly. Her shoulders tensed, and her eyes darted away. "It's nothing," she said quickly, turning back to the tea. "I must have bumped into something." John's jaw tightened. He knew that wasn't true. The shape of the bruise, it looked too deliberate, too much like fingers pressing hard into her skin. He had seen bruises like that before, and they weren't from accidents. He took a slow step closer. "Emma, that's not nothing," he said gently but firmly. "Did someone do this to you?" Emma's hand tightened around the handle of the teapot. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, almost fragile. "No," she said. "It's nothing, John. Just forget it." Forget it? John's chest ached at the way she avoided his gaze, the way her lips trembled slightly as if she was trying to hold something back. He reached for her again, this time gently placing a hand on her arm. "Emma, please. If someone hurt you, I need to know. Was it someone from work? A stranger? Tell me the truth." She shook her head. "I said it's nothing," she repeated, her voice sharper this time. But John wasn't convinced. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. He took a step back, his mind racing. Emma had never hidden things from him before. She had always been open, always trusted him. But tonight, there was something in her eyes, something like fear. Was she afraid of him? No. That wasn't it? It was something else. Someone else. John clenched his fists, frustration and worry battling inside him. He wanted to demand the truth, to make her tell him what had really happened, but something stopped him. The way she stood there, shoulders tight, hands trembling slightly, lips pressed together. It wasn't just fear. It was guilt. Guilt, the thought unsettled him. Why would she feel guilty? His stomach twisted. Unless... No. He shook the thought away. He was overthinking. Maybe she was just scared. Maybe she was embarrassed. Maybe she really had bumped into something and was just too tired to talk about it. But deep down, in the quiet part of his mind, a darker thought crept in. What if she wasn't telling him because she didn't want him to know? What if the truth was worse than he could imagine? John forced himself to take a deep breath. He needed to stay calm. He needed to give her time. "Okay," he said finally, his voice softer. "I won't push, but Emma, if you're in danger, I need to know. I need to help you." Emma hesitated. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something. But then, just as quickly, she shut her mouth and turned away. "I'm tired, John," she murmured. "I'm going to bed." She walked past him, leaving her tea untouched on the counter. John didn't move. He stood there, staring at the spot where she had been, listening to her footsteps disappear down the hall. His heart was still racing. His hands felt cold. He had walked into his home expecting a normal night with his wife. Instead, he had walked into something else. Something dark. Something unseen. And whatever it was, he had the terrible feeling that it wasn't over. Not even close. John sat in the kitchen, staring at the untouched cup of tea Emma had left behind. The warmth of the liquid was already fading, much like the warmth in her voice when she spoke to him tonight. Something was wrong. Emma was hiding something, he was sure of it. The bruise on her neck wasn't from an accident, no matter what she said. Someone had grabbed her. Hard. But why wouldn't she tell him who did it? His mind raced through possibilities. Was it someone from work? A stranger? Or worse? Was it someone she knew? The thought made his stomach twist. He stood up and walked toward the bedroom, his footsteps slow, careful. He didn't want to startle her. He just wanted to check on her, to see if she was really okay. When he reached the doorway, he found Emma sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. She hadn't even changed into her nightclothes yet. John's heart ached at the sight of her. She looked lost. He stepped inside. "Emma," he said softly. She flinched slightly, as if she hadn't realized he was there. Then she quickly wiped her face and turned toward him with a forced smile. "I thought you were going to bed," she said. John ignored the smile. It didn't reach her eyes. He sat beside her, close enough to feel her warmth but not close enough to make her uncomfortable. "Emma," he said again, more gently this time. "Talk to me. Please." Emma swallowed hard. "There's nothing to talk about." John shook his head. "That's not true." He hesitated before reaching for her hand. "I can see that something's wrong. I can see it in your eyes. I saw it the moment I walked in." Emma stiffened, but didn't pull away. John took a deep breath. "If someone hurt you, I need to know. Was it someone at work? A stranger? Just tell me and we'll handle it together." Emma shook her head. "No, it's nothing, John. It's just, I had a rough day. I'm tired." John clenched his jaw. She was lying. He could hear it in her voice, see it in the way her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the blanket. But why? "Emma," he tried again, "if you're scared—" "I'm not scared," she interrupted too quickly. John exhaled slowly. "Then why won't you tell me the truth?" Emma finally turned to face him, and for a split second, there was something in her eyes. A flicker of fear, guilt, or something else. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, she masked it. She let out a soft, forced laugh. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," she said, shaking her head. "I told you I must have bumped into something. Maybe I was half asleep and ran into a door. You know how clumsy I am?" John didn't believe a word of it. Emma was never clumsy. But what could he do? He couldn't force her to tell him. For a moment, silence filled the room. A heavy, suffocating silence. John finally sighed. "Okay," he said, though every instinct in his body screamed at him that this wasn't over. "If you don't want to tell me now, I won't push. But Emma, if you're in danger, I need to help you." Emma looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time that night, her mask cracked. Her lips trembled. Her fingers curled into the blanket. She hesitated, as if she wanted to say something. But then, just as quickly as she had opened up, she shut down again. "I'm tired, John," she whispered. "I'm going to bed." John's heart sank. She turned away from him and slipped under the covers, her back facing him. John sat there for a long time, staring at her, his mind racing. Something was wrong, and for the first time in their marriage, Emma wouldn't let him in. After a while, John finally got up and left the room, but he didn't go to bed. He sat in the living room, staring at the dark window, lost in thought. His wife was keeping a secret, and whatever it was, it terrified her, and that terrified him. John sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at nothing. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. He could hear Emma's soft breathing from the bedroom, but it did nothing to calm his racing thoughts. Something was wrong. He could feel it deep in his bones, the bruise on her neck, the way she had avoided his questions, the way she had shut down instead of telling him the truth. She was scared. But of what? John exhaled, rubbing his face. Maybe he was overreacting. Maybe it really was nothing. Maybe she had bumped into something, just like she said. But then why did she look so guilty? His mind kept circling back to that expression, the brief flicker of something in her eyes before she turned away. He had been married to Emma long enough to know when she was lying, and tonight, she had been lying. John glanced at the bedroom door, half wondering if he should go back in, wake her up, and force her to talk. But he knew that wouldn't work. She had already shut him out. He just had to wait for her to come to him, wait for her to trust him again. With a heavy sigh, he leaned back on the couch and closed his eyes, telling himself he'd rest for just a few minutes. But his mind wouldn't stop racing, and sleep refused to come. Then, a sound. A faint rustling noise coming from the bedroom. John's eyes snapped open. He sat up, heart pounding. At first, he thought maybe Emma had just shifted in her sleep. But then he heard it again. This time, a soft creaking, like the sound of footsteps on the wooden floor. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He turned his head slowly, eyes locked on the dark hallway leading to their bedroom. The door was still, closed, but something felt off. Then, another sound. A whisper. John's breath hitched. He wasn't imagining it. There was a voice, too low to understand, too soft to be normal. He rose to his feet, moving as quietly as possible. His instincts screamed at him to turn on a light, to make a sound, to do something. But he didn't. He just stood there, frozen, in place, listening. Then, suddenly, the whispering stopped. Silence. Thick. Heavy. Suffocating. John took a cautious step forward. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he reached the bedroom door. Slowly, carefully, he turned the handle and pushed it open. The room was dark, but the faint glow of the moon spilled through the window, casting silver light across the bed. Emma was sitting up. John's breath caught in his throat. She was facing away from him, her back rigid, her head tilted slightly downward. Her long hair cascaded over her shoulders, hiding her face. Something about the way she sat there, so unnaturally still, sent a chill down his spine. "Emma?" he whispered. She didn't respond. John swallowed, stepping closer. "Emma?" He tried again, his voice barely above a whisper. Still, nothing. Then, just as he reached out to touch her shoulder, she spoke, but her voice was wrong. It was too soft, too distant, too detached. And what she said made John's blood run cold. "He's coming back." John's fingers froze just inches from her shoulder. His stomach twisted into a tight knot. "What?" he breathed. Emma didn't answer. She just kept whispering. Words he couldn't fully understand. A name repeated over and over again. Daniel. 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 John staggered back, his heart pounding. Who the hell was Daniel? Emma had never mentioned anyone by that name before, not in all the years they had been together. He reached for her again, gripping her shoulder. "Emma, wake up," he said, shaking her gently. She gasped, a sharp, choking breath that made her whole body jolt. Her eyes flew open, wide and filled with terror. She turned to face him, blinking rapidly. "John!" Her voice was hoarse, confused. John tightened his grip. "Emma, what's going on? Why are you sitting up like this? And who is Daniel?" She stared at him, her face pale. "What?" "You were whispering," John said. "You kept saying a name." Daniel. Emma's entire body stiffened. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice so quiet it was almost a breath, she said, "I don't remember." John's stomach twisted. She wasn't lying. She truly didn't remember, or worse, she didn't want to remember, and that terrified him more than anything else. John stared at his wife, his mind racing. The name she had whispered, Daniel, echoed in his head. He had never heard her say that name before. It wasn't a coworker, a family member, or anyone she had ever mentioned. And yet, she had been saying it over and over in her sleep, like a prayer, or a warning. Emma's face was pale in the moonlight, her eyes still clouded with confusion. She ran a shaky hand through her hair, her breathing uneven. "I don't remember," she said again, her voice hoarse. John sat on the edge of the bed, trying to stay calm. "Emma, are you sure? You were whispering it, over and over again." She shook her head. I don't know, John. I was dreaming, I think. But I can't remember what about." John studied her face. She looked lost, like someone who had just woken up from a nightmare, but couldn't recall what had scared them. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her, but deep inside, doubt crept in. What if she wasn't forgetting? What if she was choosing not to remember? John exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. "Okay, let's just take this one step at a time." He reached for her hand, rubbing small circles over her skin. "The bruise, Emma, the one on your neck. Does it have anything to do with this?" Emma flinched. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but John saw it. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she whispered, "I don't know." John frowned. "What do you mean you don't know?" Emma hesitated, then bit her lip. "I woke up with it. I don't remember how I got it." John's stomach clenched. That didn't make sense. "You don't remember?" he repeated. Emma shook her head. "I thought maybe I hit something, but now I don't know." She glanced at him, fear creeping into her eyes. "Do you think I—" She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. John leaned closer. "Do I think you what?" Emma swallowed hard. "Do you think I did it to myself?" John froze. That thought hadn't even crossed his mind. But the way Emma said it, the quiet fear in her voice, it made his skin crawl. "No," he said quickly. "No, Emma, I don't think that." But deep down, he wasn't sure what to think anymore. She sighed and looked down at their joined hands. "Something feels off," she admitted. "Like I'm forgetting something important. But when I try to remember, it's just blank." John's grip on her hand tightened. "Emma, if something is wrong, if someone hurt you, you have to tell me." Her eyes met his. There was a moment of hesitation. Then finally she whispered, "I think I've been sleepwalking." John blinked. "Sleepwalking?" Emma nodded slowly. "Lately, I've been waking up feeling strange. Like I've been somewhere else, doing something I can't remember. And then the bruise." She trailed off, shaking her head. John's mind reeled. Emma had never sleepwalked before. Or at least, not that he knew of. Has this happened before? he asked. Emma hesitated. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, "Yes." John's pulse quickened. "How long?" Emma closed her eyes. "A few weeks." John's breath caught in his throat. Weeks? She had been waking up disoriented with no memory of what she had done. For weeks? "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice softer now. Emma sighed. "Because I thought it was nothing. Just stress or exhaustion. But tonight, I don't know, John." She looked at him, fear finally breaking through the cracks. "What if I'm doing things in my sleep? What if—" She stopped, as if the thought was too terrifying to say out loud. John swallowed. "What if what?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "What if I'm not alone when I do?" A cold chill ran down John's spine. The thought had never occurred to him before, but now he couldn't shake it. Was Emma just sleepwalking, or was something, or someone, pulling her into the night? And if so, who the hell was Daniel? John sat frozen, his mind racing with possibilities. Sleepwalking? That was bad enough. But the idea that Emma might not be alone when she did it, that sent a chill through his bones. Emma's hands trembled as she clutched the blanket, her knuckles white. She had been hiding this from him for weeks, walking around at night, waking up confused, and worst of all, whispering a name she didn't even remember. Daniel. John took a slow, deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He needed to understand this before he panicked. "Emma," he said gently. "Have you ever—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Have you ever woken up outside the house?" Emma's face paled. She didn't answer right away. Then, finally, she whispered, "Yes." John's stomach twisted. "When?" Emma swallowed hard. "Last week." She let out a shaky breath. "I woke up in the backyard, barefoot. I don't even remember leaving the bed. I was just there, standing in the grass, staring at the trees." John felt a prickling sensation at the back of his neck. "Did anything feel off?" Emma nodded slowly. "I felt like I was being watched." A shiver ran through John's spine. "Watched?" he repeated. Emma glanced toward the window, her eyes distant. "I don't know how to explain it. It was this heavy feeling, like someone was standing right behind me. But when I turned around, no one was there." John clenched his jaw. Every instinct in his body screamed that something wasn't right. This wasn't just sleepwalking. This was something else. But what? A part of him wanted to tell her to pack a bag, to leave this house immediately. But he knew Emma wouldn't go, not without answers. And neither would he. He exhaled, trying to think. "Okay," he said. "We need to figure out what's happening. If you're walking around at night, we need to stop it." Emma nodded weakly. "How?" John ran a hand through his hair. "For starters, we can set up a camera. If you're sleepwalking, we'll catch it on video. That way, we'll know what you're doing, where you're going." Emma swallowed but nodded. "Okay." John studied her for a long moment. He could tell there was more, something she still wasn't telling him. "Emma," he said carefully, "is there anything else? Anything at all?" She hesitated. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, "I hear whispers." John's chest tightened. "What?" Emma licked her lips, her hands gripping the blanket tighter. "Sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I hear someone whispering." John's blood ran cold. "Where?" he asked. Emma hesitated. Then, in a voice so quiet he barely heard it, she said, "Inside the house." John's pulse pounded. "What do they say?" Emma shook her head. "I don't know. It's always too faint, like someone's talking from far away. But sometimes I hear my name." John felt a deep, primal fear settle in his gut. He couldn't explain it. He didn't know what was happening. But he knew one thing for sure. They weren't alone. Not really. Something was watching Emma. Something was whispering to her in the dark, and whoever or whatever it was, it knew her name. John forced himself to stay calm. He needed a plan. "Okay," he said. "Tonight I'm staying up. If you start sleepwalking, I'll wake you. And tomorrow we're getting cameras. We'll figure this out." Emma nodded, her body still tense. "Okay." John reached out, gently squeezing her hand. "We'll get through this," he promised. But deep down, a horrible question nagged at him. What if Emma wasn't just sleepwalking? What if something was leading her? And what if, whatever it was, didn't want to let her go? John barely slept that night. He sat in the living room, eyes fixed on the dark hallway leading to their bedroom. He was waiting, watching. Emma had eventually drifted off, her exhaustion too much to fight. But John stayed awake, determined to catch something. His mind kept replaying her words. "I hear whispers. Sometimes they say my name." Every sound in the house felt louder now. The faint creaks of the old wooden floor, the soft hum of the refrigerator. His nerves were on edge. He kept glancing at the clock, watching the hours crawl by. Then, sometime after 3 a.m., a noise, a rustling sound. John's heart pounded as he sat up straighter. Then, footsteps. Slow, unsteady, coming from the bedroom. John shot to his feet just as Emma stepped into the hallway. His breath caught in his throat. She was barefoot, wearing the same thin nightgown she had gone to bed in. But it wasn't her clothes that made his stomach twist. It was her face. Her eyes were open, but empty. She looked awake, but she wasn't there. John had never seen her like this before. She moved stiffly, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. "Emma?" he called softly. She didn't respond. She just kept walking, straight toward the front door. John rushed forward, grabbing her arm just as her fingers brushed the doorknob. "Emma, stop," he said, shaking her gently. Emma gasped, her whole body jolted, as if she had just been dropped back into reality. She blinked rapidly, confusion clouding her face. "J. John?" Her voice was hoarse. What's happening?" John exhaled, steadying her. "You were sleepwalking." Emma's breathing turned shallow. She turned her head slowly, staring at the door, at her own hand, which was still inches from the knob. "I was trying to leave," she whispered. John nodded, tightening his grip on her. "Yeah. And I don't think this is just sleepwalking anymore, Emma." She looked at him, eyes filled with fear. "Then what is it?" John didn't have an answer, but he had a plan. The next night, John set up the cameras, one in the bedroom, another in the hallway, and a third facing the front door. He wasn't going to let this happen again without answers. Emma was hesitant, but she agreed. "Maybe if I see myself doing it, I'll remember," she said. John hoped so. That night, Emma went to bed like normal. John stayed up, watching her for as long as he could, but exhaustion eventually won. He set an alarm for every hour and fell asleep in the chair. When morning came, John rushed to check the footage. What he saw made his blood run cold. At exactly 3:12 a.m., Emma sat up, not gradually, not like someone waking from sleep. It was sudden. Like something had pulled her upright. For the next few minutes, she sat completely still. Then, she turned her head. Not toward the door, not toward the hallway, toward the camera. John's stomach twisted as he watched. Emma was staring directly at the camera. But her face, it wasn't hers. Her features looked blank, as if her mind had been wiped clean. Her eyes were open but empty, her lips slightly parted. And then, she spoke. John turned up the volume, his hands shaking. At first, it was just whispers, muffled, indistinct. Then, One word became clear. Daniel. John's entire body went cold. He rewound the video, replaying it. There was no doubt. Emma had whispered the name. Again. But there was something even worse. Right before she stood up. Her lips moved. Not in a whisper this time. She was mouthing something. John squinted, staring at the screen, heart pounding. Then, he saw it. 2 words. Words that made his blood freeze. Words that made him realize they were in danger. Emma had looked at the camera, her eyes empty. And she had silently mouthed, "He's here." John's breath hitched. He stared at his sleeping wife, his heart slamming against his ribs. What did she mean? Who was here? And who the hell was Daniel? John's hand shook as he stared at the screen. His wife, his Emma, had mouthed those words in the dead of night. He's here. A cold sweat dripped down his back. He rewound the footage again, watching Emma's blank expression, the eerie stillness in her body. And then, the whisper. Daniel. John forced himself to breathe. He needed to wake Emma, needed to tell her what he saw. But when he turned around, his breath caught in his throat. Emma was already awake. She stood at the edge of the bedroom, half hidden in the shadows, her eyes locked onto him. John's pulse pounded. "Emma?" She didn't answer. Then, a blink. As if snapping out of a trance, Emma shook her head, rubbing her temples. "John?" she mumbled, voice groggy. "What time is it?" John let out a slow breath, trying to steady himself. "It's early," he said carefully. "Come here. There's something you need to see." Emma shuffled forward, still drowsy. But as soon as she saw the laptop screen, her expression changed. Her face paled. "John, what is this?" "You tell me," he whispered. Emma watched herself on the footage, watched as she sat up, turned her head toward the camera, and whispered that name. Then came the part where she mouthed the words. "He's here." Emma's hand flew to her mouth. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. This can't be real." John grabbed her shoulders. "Emma, you have to tell me the truth. Who is Daniel?" Emma trembled. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Then, a loud bang. Both of them jumped. The noise had come from downstairs. John's stomach twisted. He exchanged a look with Emma. Without a word, he grabbed the closest thing he could use as a weapon, a fireplace poker. "Stay behind me," he murmured. Emma, too afraid to argue, followed him as he crept toward the stairs, Siat. House was silent. Too silent. John's grip tightened on the poker as he peered into the living room. Nothing. The kitchen. Nothing. Then, a whisper. Soft, just barely audible. But it was there. John's blood turned to ice. He wasn't imagining it. He heard it, and so did Emma. She clutched his arm, her body rigid. "John," she choked out. The whisper came again. This time, John could make out the words. "Come outside." John's breath caught. No. No, this wasn't happening. Emma shook her head violently. "No, we can't," she whispered. "John, please. We need to stay inside." But John had already moved to the window, peering out. And that's when he saw, in a figure, standing in the backyard, tall, unmoving, almost waiting. John's grip on the poker tightened. His instincts screamed at him to lock the doors, to call the police, to run. But before he could react, Emma did something that made his heart stop. She walked toward the door, and she reached for the handle. "Emma, no!" John grabbed her wrist, yanking her back. She gasped, her body shuddering as if she had just woken up. Her eyes darted between John and the door. I don't know why I did that," she stammered. John clenched his jaw. "We're not going out there. Emma nodded quickly, backing away from the door. John took one last glance outside, but the figure was gone. His blood ran cold. Something was wrong. Something was playing with them, and John was done being afraid. He turned to Emma, his voice firm. "Tomorrow, we're leaving." Emma nodded. "Yes, please." John exhaled, running a hand over his face. It was over. They would get in the car, drive away, and never look back. But that night, as they packed their bags, something happened that shattered his sense of relief. John woke up at 3:12 a.m. His side of the bed was empty. Emma was gone. Heart pounding, he jumped to his feet, searching the room. Nothing. Then, a whisper, faint, from outside. John rushed to the window, and his heart nearly stopped. Emma stood in the backyard, but she wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, tall, shadowed. His face was hidden in the darkness. John's pulse pounded as he ran for the door. "Emma!" he shouted. But before he could reach her, she turned around, and for the first time in his life, John felt true terror. Emma's face was blank, expressionless, and when she opened her mouth to speak, her voice was not her own. It was a man's voice, and it whispered one name: Daniel. John's breath hitched. Then, the lights in the house flickered, and everything went dark.